Ben, if you'd... Thank you, Ben Taylor, everybody! We rehearsed, I said 20% harder. This maths is not your fault. Something really interesting just happened that we will come back to shortly. Loftus and Palmer, 1974. This is one of my favourite little bits of psychological research, and it's all about perception and what happens in our minds, and yet there are also these quantifiable things that we can discuss. But let's move on. Why did this bit of research happen in the first place? It all came off the back of this piece of research. Now, we know that people are very, very bad at making judgments on things like weight, height, speed. They showed a film of a moving car to about 150 Air Force personnel, and they said, how fast was the car going? And the range of responses went from 10 miles an hour to 50 miles an hour, but the speed the car was actually going was piffling 12 miles an hour. What you have is this enormous spread of opinions as to how fast the car in the film was going. So Loftus and Palmer thought, okay, can we push people up to the 50 mile an hour line? Because with psychology, the interesting thing is when you get it wrong. When we get things wrong, it tells us all kinds of interesting things about how our brains work. So, what they did was they took a sample of 45 undergraduates, and they showed them the film of two cars colliding. And then they said, about how fast were the cars going when they, and then they divided them into groups, and they changed the way they asked the question. How fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other? How fast were the cars going when they collided, when they bumped, when they hit, when they contacted? How hard did Ben hit me? Only two of us really know, don't we, Ben? So, the results of this are really interesting. And I've put them on this wizzy graph for you. How fast were the cars going? So people estimated in miles an hour. Now at the top end, how fast were they going when they smashed into each other? 40 miles an hour. Down to how fast were the cars going when they contacted each other? All the way down to 31.8 miles an hour. These are the averages. And you might think that's not a huge difference, 31.8 to 40. But I would merely ask you to consider what would happen if this was a court of law. We were watching, we had a car accident, and people said, well, how fast were the cars going when they hit each other? And it's a 30 mile an hour zone. There's plenty of lawyers in here. We all know you're not allowed to ask leading questions of a witness, but if a leading question comes down to just one word, contacted, smashed, beaten to a pulp. We see that leading the witness could be a rather difficult thing. We now have a bit of a quandary. Why did people make these different statements, these different judgments on how fast the cars were going? Now, there's two reasons. The first is a boring reason. It's the leading question thing. It's called a response bias factor. They are merely giving the researcher what they want. The leading question, if you will. What Loftus and Palmer were interested in is the rather more exciting idea that the words they used did not just prompt a response that didn't really mean very much, but that the words they used changed the representation in the memory of the subject. So how do you test this? Is this a superficial, top-level thing, or is this a more fundamental change in the way that people perceived this little bit of film of two cars knocking into each other? So, they took a sample size of 150. They did the original experiment, except they used 3 categories now. They used smashed, they used hit, and then they didn't use any word at all. That was their control group. And then they asked how fast the car's going, and then they let everybody go home for a week, and then they brought them back a week later and said, did you see any broken glass? Now the results of this are really interesting. Again, we all make mistakes. We'll take that as a given. But if you look at the control group and the hit group, we see that 6 people got it wrong. There was in fact no broken glass. 6 people got it wrong, 7 people got it wrong. In the smashed category, this number doubles, more than doubles, up to 16. If you say, did you see any broken glass when one car smashed into the other? Glass, blood. Did you see any blood when it then really hit you quite hard there, Ian? Did you see any broken glass? Suddenly a goodly proportion of people are getting the answer wrong. What this tells us, I think, is something really interesting about the nature of perception. What this tells us is that for the first time, really, we have to understand that the evidence of our eyes and ears is not necessarily the best evidence that we can have. As I say, there's plenty of lawyers in this room, but we have also all seen the courtroom dramas. We have all seen somebody standing in a dock on film, pointing accusingly across the room and saying, "That is the man, officer. That is the man, Your Honour. I know what I saw." Elizabeth Loftus, who created this whole experiment, has been involved in hundreds of court cases which have hinged on eyewitness testimony. And Elizabeth Loftus says that eyewitness testimony is one of those things that we cannot rely on. It feels very powerful. It's like looking at the candlestick, but there is a fundamental flaw in the way that our brains work with memory, and actually you're looking at two faces. We know that when we look at a piece of evidence, it's only as good as the lens we're looking through. And suddenly, this piece of research, for me, I find absolutely fascinating because it tells us that our own biology, our own little 20 giganeuron computer that we all carry around between our ears, is this wonderful, exciting, creative, but ultimately flawed way of getting to the truth. We have to find other ways of doing so. And I'm just going to leave you with this quote. This is from the Skeptical Inquirer 2011. Because if Elizabeth Loftus, I wish I could say that she was killed in a car crash. No, sadly she, well, not sadly she wasn't, but it would have been a delicious irony, wouldn't it? There's still time. If we want to preserve our freedom, we have a responsibility to speak out against even the most cherished beliefs that reflect unsubstantiated myths. There's another quote which I have in my head just now from Carl Sagan, who says that even if we work on different covenants, we are all after the same thing, which is the search for truth. And I wonder if we could just pause a moment and ask ourselves not what we know, but how we know it. And I also like to think that you will forgive Ben Taylor for the uncharacteristic brutality with which he began this speech. Thank you very much.